Asbestos cancer is, I believe, our testimony will show you, is one of the worst kinds of death. It's terrible because there's no real medical treatment. The doctors don't have anything that's going to cure it. They might sustain your life for a little while, but it's considered an incurable cancer. There aren't drugs. See, I was talking to you about the lining of the lung and how it looks like saran wrap. That's because it doesn't have blood flow. Blood flow would give color to it. And because there's no blood flow, you can't just be taking chemotherapy drugs or things like that that are administered through the blood system. They don't reach the roots of the tumor. Some doctors will carve open somebody and try and core out a bunch of their insides where the tumor has grown. And they'll try pouring hot chemo into the body cavity under anesthesia. But even that's not going to kill it all. It's just a matter of time till it comes back. So it's a terrible kind of death. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 4,000 mesothelioma deaths in America each year, which makes it really difficult to study because it's not a big enough cancer to where the cures are out. It's not breast cancer. It's not prostate cancer. It's not one of these cancers where you've got such an overwhelming mass of people that there's a lot of medicine that's focused on it. So it's a tragic cancer. Now the question becomes why? Why does John Parker have this mesothelioma? Whose fault is it? Ladies and gentlemen, that's what the evidence is going to direct you to, and I think the evidence is going to show you that John got his asbestos from working with Cron-Jane asbestos gaskets and packing, along with insulation and some other things from some other defendants that aren't in this case. And he got this asbestos exposure working as a pipe fitter, both in the Navy in the early 60s and on through the rest of his career. And he worked around these pipes, and that's where he got his exposure. Now, if he got exposure from this defendant's asbestos, then I think a very natural question is, why was Cron-Jane putting asbestos in their gaskets? What was it doing there? And what kind of warnings was this company giving to Mr. Parker and others like him? Those are fair questions, and they're points of focus for this trial. You'll hear testimony from witnesses, both for the company and against the company, on these issues. You'll hear testimony that tells you some very basic things. You'll hear about asbestos. I want to talk timelines for a minute. If you're going to give someone any type of linear thinking or chronology, study after study after study says the human being can only handle 2, maybe 3 dates of chronology by hearing it alone. It's like trying to learn some mathematical equation. You've got to see it visually if the brain is going to understand it and keep it. That's not bizarre, cutting-edge science. That's 101 science of how the brain works. I mean, this is fundamental. You cannot give chronology without putting it down. So you got to have a PowerPoint, you got to have a chart, so you got to have a blackboard. You can do it any way you want to do it, but people have to visually see it to follow it. So I put the chronology up, a simple timeline for y'all for this purposes. How did Cron-Jane have to know? What evidence am I going to have to support this idea that they had to know asbestos could be lethal? Well, I'll suggest to you in 1900, the early 1900s, you get your very first studies that show asbestos can kill. Not only that, but by 1930, you've got over 100 studies showing asbestos can be lethal. By 1940, you've got studies confirming that asbestos causes cancer. Let's keep going. By the 1960s, you've got thousands of articles, thousands of reports, thousands of studies. You've got it in books. You've got it in the Encyclopedia Britannica that asbestos can cause cancer and asbestos can kill you. That asbestos can cause this particular cancer, mesothelioma. All of that's out there. Also by the 1960s, you've now got people who mine the asbestos and sell the asbestos to companies like Cron-Jane. You've got them telling the companies, hey, this asbestos is lethal. By 1972, ladies and gentlemen, you've got the government itself. The government itself telling companies like Cron-Jane, that have to follow OSHA regulations. The company is getting knowledge asbestos can be lethal. 1972. Now, if we put all of that on one mini timeline, where does Cron-Jane fit into this? What did they do? How did they handle this wealth of information out there to industries and companies in the process of doing what they're doing? Manufacturing, selling, gaskets, packing, things like that. Well, in 1920, Cron-Jane started making their first asbestos packing and gaskets. 1920. They continued to manufacture them until 1985 or 3, I believe. But in 1981, they finally started warning the John Parkers of the world. 1981. That means in spite of all of this information, from 1920 to 1981, Cron-Jane never tested their product to see if it was dangerous and never warned the users that it contained a toxic substance. A particularly mean, malevolent, bad toxic substance. And this was there in their packing, it was there in their gaskets, it's there in the actual fibers that the men were dealing with when they take these little screws and they'd start screwing out all of the old to put in the new. When they take the old gaskets and they sever apart the pipes and the gasket would be powderized and torn and they'd have to get an iron wheel, bristle brush to go after it. And you'll see a video by an engineer out of Atlanta, Georgia, Dr. Longo, where he actually uses, it's called Tyndall lighting, a special lighting effect so that you're able to visually see dust that you would not be able to see otherwise. Understand, when you see the dust, you're not seeing individual fibers of asbestos. You'd need an electron microscope for that. But you're seeing asbestos fibers big enough to see, or clumped enough to see visually, and you will be amazed at what you see. Now, what does the company say about this? Well, the company's said several things so far. I don't know what they're going to say. Mr. Spezialy is a tremendous lawyer, and I'm sure he's going to have his explanations. One of them that we've heard so far is that the company thought they were using the safe kind of asbestos. That for some reason, as long as the asbestos is white instead of blue or brown, it doesn't hurt you quite so badly. It's called chrysotile asbestos. It's shaped a little differently. It's kind of more like a Cheeto and less like a pocket knife. It's kind of curly. But that's one of their defenses. Now, I'll be candid with you. That defense never arose until lawsuits. The science never supported it until something was needed to help these companies in litigation. Because you can look on a map, chrysotile causes mesothelioma according to the national reports in every one of these countries. But you're going to be suggested it doesn't in this courtroom. I can tell you chrysotile causes mesothelioma according to the World Health Organization, according to the Consumer Product Safety Commission, the American Cancer Society, the EPA of the United States, the Public Health Service, OSHA, NIOSH, on and on and on. I can list the organizations that will tell you this asbestos causes it, but the company says not. The company will also try to tell you that there was a safe exposure level, they thought, and they were trying to follow those rules. The bottom line is, you'll see evidence there was not. The company will also try to play the blame game. They'll say, well, wait a minute, he also had asbestos exposure to insulation. Where is that defendant? Why aren't they in the courtroom?